because I want to.
Yeah.
So thanks for being here for it. My love, when we first set sail and pushed off to sea, I stood at the bow looking backward, dry-eyed and imagining that the world in all of its color and grandeur and majesty had been devastated by that same flood I'd seen when I told you that my father was making me leave. It was a midsummer night's eve, and in my heart it was a romance. That same Shakespearean tragedy, that quintessential teenage flickering that let love burn brighter in the reminiscent memories as we slowly fell asleep. Cuddling beneath the stars that I wished upon through the cutout at the top of the teepee. It doubled by day as an Indian fort, with girls' path cooties stitched across the seams, and at night, our secret love affair that the cowboys would have deemed a crime punishable by catgut. And sour faces and wild, wild west make-believe, old enough to comprehend but young enough to dream. I can still hear the rhythm of your breathing beneath that canopy, while the wind played brush on the stair and God threw her bolts of lightning like the thunder clapped clave to complement the whistling moving through the trees. And remembered you promising that when we grew up, you'd build a home for me. Now to start growing, and you'd curl up your fake mustache like your favorite character in your favorite movie and whisper, I'll be your Huckleberry. So in the morning, when I snuck back to my room, I thought tragedy indeed, that innocence, if ever it was, can be stripped away without a warning, my king. By grace or by fate or by luck or by mercy, I trust the moon will carry your letters safely to me. This flood rescinding will give way to land depending, and like the hand of God gave olive leaves to encourage that ancient family, my dove, with love, sincerity, and all that I have to offer to you. Your queen, but my everything! I found your letter inside of a bottle, and I didn't know what to say, but it was broken further down the cove. Ink spilled hallowed, but such a shallow grave. Read your poem like it was life in itself. Starved for hope like the waters were too hard to navigate, but it figures, if I was gonna build us a home, well then your heart would find its way. And it smelt of sea salt and your father's favorite poison, and I will never ever forget that day. Some college rule lines clouded by the liquor, like a watercolor painting that had absorbed the spectrum with blue and hues thereof, or like a piece of bread to absorb the damage. That bottle of secret shattered against the seashell and rewrote the story that it would tell to any little girl who might pick up that whitewashed tomb, expecting to hear the ocean, listening for the crescendo and the crash, when at last she'll hear the echoes of your whispers. These bottles will carry my heart home, and the currents will be kind, and my lover's letters will return to me, and our children will grow to find that all is not for naught, and the wall is not yet healed. Their parents, they worked hard for it, and the storms honored their appeals to see that though my father is drowning, his bottles float above the waves, and though I used to dread the water, its waves will be faithful to crash every day until at last I see your face like things aren't the same. I've been picking up splinters of lumber for the floorboards and wondering about all of our splintered promises, like even though we didn't have control over their breaking, oaths like those don't account for much. And I loved the beach for the way the breath of God rose out of the deep. I hated the sand, but I tolerated to hold your hand and watch the sun sink into the sea. Feet buried beneath the surface. Molten love buried just beneath the surface, erupting, volcanic, unable to keep beneath the surface. It broke like our parents' dormant, surface level. Crater of a marriage that looked more like a coffin every time I read the note that I stole out of my father's casket before it closed. He wrote it to my mother, a woman I never met, but it made me feel just like I knew her. And this is everything that it said.
People will come, Chris.
There it is. Dear diary, grandfather's as creaky as his front porch, loads his shotgun beneath the awning, spittoon restless for rain, carpenter's chair against the whistling air, rocking back and forth, rocking snapshot picture worth it. Just like the movies, she said that he loved baseball, and James Earl Jones, she said that he's got God talking inside of his thoughts as he's rounding those bases on his way back home. And if you build it, they will come and maybe listen to what the Lord said. But, God, I've been getting pretty worn building for nearly a decade. But in a perfect world, we shouldn't have been allowed to lose sight of what it means to love wholly. I got a Polaroid hanging on my wall that a friend took of me and my angel. I remember the day like it's something that I can touch, but it's stuck in the square between the borders of a film, and I can run my fingers over our faces. But I can't get back to the places we were, like you've got pain in your bones, son, compelling you forward like you're tied to a slave master's cruel hand, and it's the same pain that drives that oppressor's heart and stone. So you grew to love the man. You keep pouring yourself out again and again into legible lines through a crooked pen, and it's painful, but it's familiar. Habit breeds comfort. What would I do without him? In the early morning, when you've fallen asleep in our home, I drift back into the memories that I've claimed as my own and wonder if tonight will be a night that I hang on my wall like I did before we stopped taking photos for being comfortable. In a perfect world, we'll have albums labeled seasons with chapter headings. We'll staple them to the corkboard that hangs at the foot of the bed. There's longevity in a memory that's spilt out in pen, and if a picture is worth 1,000 words, I've written down every one of them. I work hard, scarred, I toil through the soil for the youth that I see in my friends. But these journals are moments in time, snapshots in our lives, and in retrospect, age is an overexposed photo that the memories can't mend. God, I gotta know my sweet seductress, and her name is Depression. I wrote best beneath that demon's destructive oppression. In those Polaroids, she drove the ink into the canvas like a slave beneath his master's cruel hand. And I hated that whip, but I always wondered what I'd do without it. And so I grew to love the man, and I wept for change. I begged for movement, and the good Lord, he answered my prayers. But you don't know how to breathe easy when you let go of your habits. Even if your comforts left you gasping for air, dear time, grandfather's as creaky as his front porch. Sent like oil in the gun barrel, dip cam kicked over the railings, sandpaper hands stuck behind thumbtacks on my wall. I've got an ache in my chest for every season I miss, and it gets worse when the snow starts to fall. There are butterflies alive in that couple's eyes a few years since, forgotten by all, and sometimes, when the phone rings, I hear their wings when you call. But I begged for movement and got what I asked for. I can picture the answer like it came yesterday, and in the land of the gods, I swear things are still timeless, but all of us, we're prone to decay. Like, you know, I still lift up hope for certain smiles in those photos of us when I pray. And time is a cruel lover. She breaks her house apart at its bones. Comfort, there's no good reason to stand still. Idle hands build nothing that you can call your own.
I mean to kill you in 1 minute, Dad. Or see you hanged in Fortran to Chuck Parker's convenience. Which will it be? I call it full talk from what
That's the king.
Fill your hand, you son of a...
We're in a church. God, when the sun sets or escapes, when there's a painter who paints, and when he paints, we just take in the ripples the paint's made when they swell against the textures on the page and name them waves. Back home, my other spends his nights all alone and thinks it's all about perspective and taking my thoughts captive. He'd be captivated by it. It's all counterfeit. It's all functional saviors that don't function or save you. It's all identity tripped. It's all grandiose promises exposed as illegitimate. It's the whale my father seeks and swears by like it'll bring unity to our family. It's the way my mother drove away the same day that she drove the man to drink, and called it killing two birds with one stone. Or three, if you count me. Like I was a seed. She used to say I was the only beautiful thing that ever blossomed from her branches, but I guess I wasn't beautiful enough to keep. The gun was cocked and loaded years before I ever watched her leave. But we always saw her finger on that trigger, trembling. I have heard tales of lovers broken by the bullets that every single one of us might call our parents. For example, in 50 BC, Parthenius and Isaiah penned the Iranian lover into Narcissus' story, who gutted himself with a sword on a man's doorstep. In 880, Ovid found Echo in a mountain crevice, rejected and lonely, until only faint shivers of her whispers remained. And to me, this far removed, they are as clear as the day. With that nymph's voice in my head here in Poseidon's domain, for all of the fury with which Arminius and that pagan deity prayed, for all of the fiction children believe, and by which we are betrayed, and despite the winds constantly driving and tossing the waves, and all my double-mindedness, I still hear the refrain that this is not your story. When I watch my dad walk starboard, I picture a pirate walking the plank, looking down into the water, terrified, only to see his reflection and fall so madly in love. He dives headfirst into himself and becomes all that I argued with those echoes about what he deserved to be. I picture Nemesis like a John Wayne movie. I know you always loved True Grit, but at the end of the script, Maddie still doesn't have her daddy back. And I hope that one day, each of us will be able to forgive, but until then, maybe presence is greater than answers. Or revenge. If Zeus cast my mother out to Hades, she'd still be just as gone as she is now. And if you sent ghosts to tell me all of the reasons why I still can't sleep at night, I'd be wide awake listening. So if you can hear me, I would rather have you than all of my answers. All these years removed, I'd still rather have you than all of my answers. My love, while you were weighing anchor, I was weighing my options, thinking why, like knowing would satisfy. But if love is true, then the tide will carry mine to... Man, it's the future that I miss the most. 17 years from now, I want to be younger and as carefree as I can be. I want you next to me. I want you to reflect all of the best of me. I want the fairy tale, parenthetical porch swing, metaphorically morphing our upbringing into enough of a string to hang by to believe I was a man before I got the chance to be a boy. Mother said she wanted neither. Father said it was his joy. He kept on saying things like, enjoy your youth while you can. But when the cancer started taking its toll, the roles reversed, and I cannot fathom what it is like to be eaten alive. He said he had ants beneath his skin, but even then he'd tell it in a bedtime story. Son, there are colonies of Englishmen with marching orders to see to it that Indians become just like them, dressed up in distinguished garb to cover up their colors and civilize them. Well, he said, in a similar sense, I've got tuxedo black blood cells clothing those that bleed red. If you can laugh along with me, the irony is that I'll be better dressed than I've ever been when I lie to rest here in bed. And you wondered why that fort was always the one left standing. I made sure that they won every time we played that game. And I had mud clods filled with rocks that I launched in the backs of those backstabbers, but admittedly, as you can imagine, it was a short-lived fame. All my neighborhood friends bleeding from their heads and everything. Life is pain, Highness. Anyone who tells you different is selling something. It is not true. The Dread Pirate Roberts may have been awesome. That kind of theology is one hell of a downer to subscribe to. And I know that there's beauty out there. I'm sure you can see it on the ocean. Even if the crew has started to look as white as that whale they're chasing. Like I've been reading through Moby Dick. That book is hundreds of pages of rhetoric. And I don't really understand any of it, but Captain Ahab is looking pretty pale. Be careful. I've been building our tree house. I hid it far enough away so that when we run, we can stay. And I wrote out the location like a secret on a treasure map. However long your voyage, you'll have a place to call home when you come back. The ladder is nailed to the trunk. I started hammering the foundation to be sure that we had something to build our future on. How I long for the day that I get to see your face. My strength. My hope. My soul. Do you know that you're my soul? 12 months ago today, we stood in silence, fading further and further away, and refused to say goodbye for fear that the farewell might solidify our fate. I knocked on every inch of this vessel to keep that fear from coming true. Goodbye is such a definite word, an infinite word, an intimate word, but it needs to be heard so that you don't have to wonder why the bottles stopped coming. Gosh, all right, look. I am bringing home Scrimshaw to hang from the walls of the branches of the balcony. Father gave me 2 teeth from the beast that they harpooned last week, and they've been flensing the creatures at dock. I've been getting my feet underneath these sea legs. I had a week or more to explore those foreign shores while the crew and the captain knocked at every brothel door. And I imagine I've got scores of siblings on this island, considering the captain is an island unto himself. Give it time. There are 1,000 orphans forgiving their fathers 70 times, 7 times, and I met one of them that week who became a friend of mine. He reminded me of you. Don't be jealous, it wasn't quite as cute, you know? He didn't have like any of the tools that you've been using to build our shelter. God knows that I'm gonna need it, man. I always need it. Shelter. But we followed a road out to the country that he said he'd known about for years and claimed that it was haunted. Boys always tell those tales when they want to put their arms around you. The monster films were made for men on first dates. I went along. The landscape stood frigid, frost painted, and I contemplated the warm blanket that you would have been in all that cold. I saw ghosts every time I opened my mouth to breathe in and out and pretended that it was smoke, like the bubblegum cigarettes that we used to get from the corner store before you died with your dad. Acted like they were opiates before the dance and the fog. It was like poetry. Difficult to define, but I am completely indifferent as to what it means, so long as we are able to get lost in it. But the boy and I met a mystic at the top of the mountain. The mist cut her straight in two, layers over her legs to keep the cold from coming through, but belly up, half a sundress. And she looked at us and said, "Get your head out of the clouds." So with the sun shining down, I've been thinking about what she meant. She gave a speech about separating herself and related it to the whales. Said when the seamen dig their talent in to empty them and burn their substance for oil, remember they had to separate to find their true worth. And with the white dividing her skeleton frame like a personified worldview, it was the cloudiest case for dualism that I have ever heard of. She told us her feet were evil because they touched the ground, ears guilty by association because they heard the sound, with the mind wicked that wandered and wondered about music, sex, love, and the men in the town below. And I don't know. She sounds like my grandparents, trying to distinguish between antique spirituals, done damned to hell for a pagan drumbeat and unholy. I just hope that if we're a true reflection of some magnanimous other, I won't have to assume that every longing will find me buried alive. You'd think that if God created everything good, she wouldn't stand up on a mountain proclaiming inanimate objects bad and demonizing the rest of creation. Like it's the Tempo's fault she's stuck alone on a pedestal, cutting herself in half. I want to dance to music, drink wine to the melody, make love in our treehouse. It makes me feel alive. She was kind, but I declined to follow in her footsteps. Kissed the boy on the cheek to stick it to the man. Like we left for the great unknown first thing this morning. And if I am going to die at sea, I'm going to be as holistically human as I possibly can be. And believe that I am that way for a reason. Like when I sit on the pier and wait for that black abyss to swell and spit out your letters, my heart rises and falls with the water, and sometimes I wish it would swallow me. Heaven, the expanse above the tide rising and beneath the rain falling. Sometimes breathing feels just like drowning, stuck here in between. But when your bottles float in, there's nothing as beautiful as their dim glow, and my heart longs after them. Their colors catch my eye. Dank bourbon or molded green, protecting white sheets painted with calligraphic handwriting, tainted with damp expressions of the bottle's history, but purely you. Purely you. Like thinking about what beauty is, but no thinking adds beauty to it. All I know is that it points beyond itself. Like I long beyond your love notes. Like I long for you. I've seen the entire spectrum refracting off the ripples beneath my bare feet from the edge of this weathered dock, and thought, God, there has got to be more than this. I have no idea what to believe, but beauty pulls me beyond myself like I don't have a choice, and I know that I don't believe in nothing. So where, my love, does the beauty inside of a tree reside? Made up of atoms, identical and colorless, where the light of the sun merely vibrates and waves toward our eyes, striking tissues and moving along nerves like a telephone wire to their endings, like telephones. I don't know. There's no actual color in the atoms of which the tree is composed or in those vibrations. So shape and size and color, touch and the like, they're just the names we call our sensations, and no amount of study can ever bring the notion of beauty to the tree. So when I don't know how, please help me to embrace the mystery. Will you come home? This treehouse will not be that without you. Are you all okay? Thank you. Today, the first mate told me that my men intend to mutiny, and I have condemned an entire crew in search of a fabled leviathan that we would not have known what to do with had he existed in the first place. But we're sinking, he said, and your daughter is in love with the boy back home, dreaming that she is living his life. She's asleep in the cabin, and if you have even a hint of sobriety in between gulps from that last buoy she'll use to say goodbye, you'll turn this ship around. It's too late. We're drowning. Daughters of fathers just like mine, except theirs will live out their lives on land long after their daddies have died at sea. Some will remember them as noblemen. The rest as having abandoned their roles for a pipe dream, all as good or god-awful as their imaginations allow themselves to believe. And I don't know whether I care, or if I could not possibly care less. Like when you first set sail and pushed off to sea, I stood in the bow looking everywhere but at my legacy. With that blue ribbon holding up her hair, eyes locked on the boy that I made her leave, waving. I have been chasing this great white dream for as long as catching him stood the promise that I could substantiate every reason that I failed my family. Like I wanted to be a brave man. I wanted to prove to my wife that I wasn't a failure. I wanted to tell my daughter that Daddy always tried and tried his hardest. I tried my best to make it work. My best was always at their expense. And all of the things that I idolized became my captors. Every single thing became my captor. And now that it's too late, I know that drifting is a deeper threat than betrayal. No one has to convince you to abandon anything. You just inevitably end up downstream. Maintain your pride and wonder why the world keeps on shifting. Convinced that you're still standing in the same place. You never mean to drift away. Maybe if you survive and find this, I was right about one thing. Your mother used to say that I was afraid, but apathy, it's not the same as escape. And I was never running. It's just that I was never fighting. Like indifference sneaks in subtly, and subtleties can kill a man. It'll be of no difference to you. Though if there is a God, know that I will stand before her with no excuse, and I can only assume that he will weep. Tragedy, indeed. That innocence, though it never was, could have been. This is for you for sure. A lady, I have combed every inch of this island looking for the final pieces of wood needed to complete our wooden treehouse. I marked the path with cryptic carvings of arrows for right turns and bayonets for lefts, and eventually it drops off into a waterfall. And you can rest assured that if anyone sniffs out our steps, every adult will sneer and bet that no one would be dumb enough to jump off and into it. But we are growing, and childlikeness is the only way to live. So hand in hand, I will stand for nothing less than dives, head first, and also backflips. But also gainers, if anyone wants to gainer, you can do it. But we're gonna give this whole life everything that we've got. And if that means jumping off of really high rocks and into water, then so be it. Telling ghost stories of our face-painted friends around campfires, but for the love of God, no acoustic guitars. I hate campfire acoustic guitar guys. And we'll have sleepovers and sleep over one another, and you'll get a chance to see your wishes come true beneath the same stars that I heard you whisper to when I pretended to be asleep all those months ago. We've been playing our games, but they're just not the same without you here to rescue me. Somebody always plays your dad, and I am constantly John Smith getting his head bashed in with a war club. You'll probably laugh when you read this, but you don't hear any of those sounds coming up from Jamestown, man. At this point, Disney is screwed. I think it's my time to come to your rescue. If all of our bottles find their way to one another, then surely our hands can too. I've been sawing off branches to make room for our rooms and pinching them together to keep the moisture from coming through. I lifted a sail from in between the logs, nailed an engine to the trunk, and stood at the front to balance and keep myself from falling off. And it's not perfect, but it'll do, you know. I'm gonna ride our house's roof to come and get you. So the boy set sail and pushed off to sea, stood at the bow looking forward and out into everything, confident. And though we had no idea what the ocean would bring, there are some things that I know I believe. No matter how irreconcilable they may sometimes seem to be to me. Like there are some things singer-songwriter I know. I love his so much. It's beautiful every time. So we got to open up all these shows, and then immediately afterwards I'd get up on stage and just rip him up, you know? It was great. It was great. Something that I always admired most about you. No matter how violent the storm, no matter how high the waves, no matter how dark the night, you never let the world get inside of your boat. You kept living when everyone else was sinking, and this whole life never got one droplet toward pulling you down to the ocean floor. Admittedly, this last bottle has room enough for the last of my heart because I drank the last of it myself. I hated it, by the way. It seems my father could have picked a vice that tasted better than rubbing alcohol. But hey, he gave me his last flask when he came downstairs to say that he wanted things to have been different, and I believed him. He said that he needed to go down with the ship, but he wished that I didn't, and I believed him. Listen. The want to die is no longer a foreign thought in my mind. A lot of people want to, and I could have died without leaving a note behind. A lot of people do. He started slurring about this memory that he must have caught in the musty air, like a dust particle stuck to the glaze over his eyes when you were 6 years old. I stood inside of our home in a windowsill, watched you walk back from that boy's house down the street. I was sick. And I went back to bed before I thought that you saw me, and when I heard you call out, Daddy, I pretended to be asleep. I just didn't have the energy to get up and keep you from believing in the ghosts that you have seen ever since. He finally fixed his gaze, afraid, and said, Honey, they have been haunting me. But I hope that you don't have to believe them any longer. And I believe him. If I can give you anything, let it be that I have not bid my farewell from the ocean, but from the moment we waved goodnight after our first victory as body-painted newlyweds in a Cul-De-Sac colony, looking forward to morning, when our parents would let us sail through the quiet neighborhood streets, and the dawn would bring us back together again, like we were cowboys, or we were Indians, or we were pilgrims, and none of us ever cared that cowboys didn't come here from England. We were just making our pilgrimage toward the sun, searching for freedom and rewriting history for everyone, but mostly us. Like mostly us, baby, I'm still playing our game. I'm just sailing for the new world alone this time. I wish I could come back to tell you what I find, but life has never consulted me before making all of these big decisions. And I stand helpless and hopeless unless the beauty that you see in the mystery really points to something. I wish we could explore this together. Let me tell you, to die will be an awfully big adventure, but don't get lost. Boy, I want to talk to one another about it someday. It's time to say goodbye. Such a definite word, an infinite word, an intimate word, but it needs to be heard so that you don't have to wonder why the bottle stops coming. You need closure to move on. You can't sink with me. You'll get this after I'm gone. And I hope that you can use our treehouse to love someone else once the tide has finally set you free. Don't tell her who you built it for. Make her believe that she's the reason you put all of those Sounds like wishful thinking. But I do know that you can't stop living just because someone else has. My love, don't sink. Don't sink. You're queen. We always talked about taking that voyage together. We didn't want to die in our sleep like so many people wish for. Or at least she didn't. She thought it sounded boring. And even though dying scared me, I wanted to be brave enough to engage in the fantasy. We decided we'd go out defending our treehouse against the separatists. It was inevitable once they'd finally discovered us kissing traitorously beneath their cootie-infested boys-only headquarters. We'd be catgunned to death. She thought it was romantic. Like Romeo and Juliet, she'd say, and I'd say, okay. But wonder like I always do. If anyone has ever actually heard that story. I finished our treehouse with a few scraps of dead wood that I was able to drag back to land. It seemed fitting after our whole lives were broken homes for all of those shipwrecked pieces to complete one. It was beautiful. Like something she might have called redemption. For a split second, as I watched the last of her craft fall beneath the surface of the water, I thought that we are all only stones in an ocean, and maybe it didn't matter that much whether we lived or died, but she was right about taking thoughts captive. I am lonely, and I can't reconcile loneliness with meaninglessness, because like beauty, it leaves me wanting for more. She is still a decision that floats out like debris on ripples that began at her stone's throw. You are a mountain to me. Your earthquake leaves me trembling, and I long beyond your beauty, past your breaking, out into whoever is responsible for your new beginning. Maybe he knows the end. God, do you know the end? When you first set sail and pushed off to sea, I stood at the shore looking forward, tongue-tied and stubbornly holding tears behind my eyes. No matter how much I like you, girl, there's a boy in me. I am not weeping with you staring back, smiling, and I guess this is goodbye. And I've done every inch of this treehouse to keep that word away, but goodbye, despite all of my efforts, remains. And this is the last of our bottles. If it ever makes its way out to the new world, know that it was unending love that fueled the moon's magnetic pull to pursue you through the death that threatened to conquer it. And it is beautiful, and it cannot fail, and it will not fail. Definitely. Infinitely. Intimately. Your king.